Thank you so much, Jess. Pleasure to be here with you all this evening to talk about budgets. I will start with the confession. I was 25 years in state government, and a fair bit of that, a fair bit of my time revolved around budgets, and I came to really enjoy the budgeting process, which makes me a weird nerd, I know. I used to call it Christmas in July every year when it would come around. So I think in light of that, just to preview a little of what you're going to hear from staff here tonight, we got some good presents under the tree this year. We did some good things this year. It's not to say that there isn't coal in the stocking, in some cases, literally. Uh, but I think on the whole, we had some wins that frankly we were not necessarily expecting to have when the budget season was kicking off a few months ago. So very, very excited for your engagement. Very, very excited to have you here with us. As I think you all know, PennFuture, we're an environmental advocacy organization. We have staff doing a lot of this work as well as litigation and regulatory work and civic engagement work across the Commonwealth. So excited to engage with you all. Pleased that you're all here. And I will turn it over to Katie Bloom from Conservation Voters from Pennsylvania. Katie.
Pat. I also want to recognize we were a wonderful bonus last minute addition. I just want to give a shout out to Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania's Executive Director, Molly Parson, who was also able to join us today. So we have some interesting things going on with the state budget. So I do want to just kind of walk through what the state budget is. These quotes, we put these up every year. One of our team members called them vintage earlier. But budgets are moral documents, and if you're not on the table, you are definitely on the menu. We did get some of those presents under the Christmas tree that Pat was talking about earlier. We'll get to that a little bit later. We have put in a lot of work recently to make sure that the environment is at the table, and we have been growing and growing that influence. Next slide, please. Just for everybody's awareness, when we talk about the budget and why Pat was talking about July, even though we tend to have a late budget, I do just want to lift this up. I know the writing's a little bit small, but sort of the budget is about a year-round process. Right now, probably just 4 or 5 weeks, there's a little bit of a breath in the state budgeting process, but agencies start putting together all of their requests, their very first requests early in the fall. Lots of conversations with the budget office and the governor, back to the agencies, final budgets after feedback from the governor's office, and then the address in February, and then a slew of hearings, and then we go into what we all know from the news is June being budget month. So that's the time frame, just for everybody's awareness to know that this isn't just a June process, but it's an all year process. Next, to kind of dive into the weeds first, I really want to kick it over to our special guest first. We have State Representative Liz Fiedler with us this evening. She's going to be talking about the very exciting program that we got passed through both chambers, HB 1032, Solar for Schools, and we got a budget allocation. So 2 really big, huge happenings there. But also we had legislation around what we call PETA, the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority, where there's going to be solar for all money from the IRA, going through hopefully some other IRA investments as money gets released from the federal government, as well as, looking ahead to the fall, looking ahead to other things that we need to do. So I want to pass it over to State Representative Fiedler, talk about Solar for Schools and the process, and PETA and some of the other things we're looking forward to. So Representative Fiedler.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you to everybody for having me. It's really, I've gotten to spend a few days now processing the fact that we actually passed Solar for Schools after working so hard to just pass it for a year and a half. So huge shout out to Molly and Katie and everyone on this call who really worked incredibly hard to get us to this point. It is a big victory in this budget. I wasn't sure where Pat was going with it when he said he'd been in state government for more than 2 decades working on budgets. I wasn't sure if the ending would be that you loved it or you didn't, but it is an interesting process and I love it as well. Thank you. When my kids brought me a drink, so I would be ready. I love it as well. And I think it is, the budget is, it's a moral document. It is a combination of so much different stuff that makes me feel great, stuff that makes me feel other ways. And I think that Solar for Schools is absolutely a highlight in this budget and is something that I'm incredibly proud of. We worked really hard since the beginning to have a rock solid coalition of stakeholders. And Conservation Voters was right there since the very beginning. We worked very hard on what we call blue and green, so bringing together environmental groups and labor and making sure that those two groups, along with education advocates, were right at the heart of the coalition for Solar for Schools. And along the way, we certainly worked closely with federal partners. One of the appeals of Solar for Schools, which of course is a state grant program to help schools across the Commonwealth install solar panels either on the roof of their building or on the grounds. One of the appeals and the answers to the question, why now, for this program is the possibility of bringing back so much in federal funding to pay for these projects. We believe that the IRA and federal dollars will pay for 30 to 50% of every Solar for Schools project, 30 to 50%, which is super exciting and obviously means a lot of money coming back when we're talking about projects that could cost, about $1 million on average, especially for the bigger ones. So that I believe that the federal dollars, I believe that the federal dollars were a huge motivator for us to be able to pass it this year after working so hard for so long. Solar for Schools did pass the House last year, so last June, so 13 months ago. And we were really proud of the bipartisan vote in the House and then spent a full year really crisscrossing the state, working with coalition partners on advocacy and working very, very hard to bring a really strong bipartisan group in the Senate to lead the bill in the Senate and to get it across the line. It was mentioned, Katie mentioned that there was an appropriation for it, and that was something that we really hoped would be possible ever since the beginning. But you never know in Harrisburg, and I do feel incredibly proud of the $25 million appropriation. We believe that that money will really help a lot of struggling school districts be able to participate in this program. And obviously one of the big appeals of Solar for Schools is the environmental benefits, making sure we're investing in renewables in every part of the state. Another really big part of Solar for Schools and its benefit is purely financial. And that was part of the appeal, absolutely, for a number of the school districts that we talked to, that we visited in more rural parts of the state. I was really interested to see where everyone on this call is from. We know that school districts in urban, rural, and suburban parts of Pennsylvania are struggling financially. They absolutely want to be part of the renewable energy movement and want to make sure that we're passing on clean water and clean air to the next generation. And at the same time, they're really struggling with budgets. And so we saw Solar for Schools as an awesome way to sort of address both of those needs, both of those priorities for superintendents and school districts across the Commonwealth. So yeah, we're really excited about the appropriation. We think that it will help some of those, especially financially struggling school districts, be able to participate in the program, install solar panels, and then obviously they will save tremendous amounts of money. But all of that might not be possible for them if they weren't able to receive just a little bit of support from the state to get to cover that remaining 50 to 70% of the project that the feds don't cover. So yeah, just really excited for the conversation. I'm grateful that we were able to get it across the line. And it was really cool. Katie and Molly know it was really cool to be there in the building with all the stress of the budget unfolding, which always happens. And it sounds like Pat likes it. I'm going to have to ask him for stress management tips because I love it, but it also is like such a wild ride. It was really cool to be there amid all that stress and also get to go into rooms where people were talking about such a positive project as Solar for Schools, something that we'd worked so hard on. Oh, Molly, my tuxedo kitty is right here too. Jennifer, she was trying to get on the screen, but she didn't. She's glad I'm home. It was really cool to have such a positive project to be able to talk about. And we know that a lot of the struggle in Harrisburg, in my time there, at least in the last 5 or so years, has been pushing back against things that we do not want to see from an environmental standpoint. So it felt really great to have something that we could rally around and push for an appropriation. And they're just starting to build out the program, the guidelines, the application, but we're going to keep track of that. And really hoping we can have some exciting projects to be able to talk about in the next, 6 to 8 months before we go back for budget season again. So just really grateful to everybody on this call for having me and for your work, and looking forward to the discussion and taking some questions.
If you could touch on it, is also with PETA, we have a lot of folks who are also interested in other IRA things. Could you speak a little bit about PETA and maybe what's ahead for the fall?
Yes, absolutely. And I got so excited talking about Solar for Schools, I forgot to talk about PETA, which is my favorite acronym, the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority. If you're not familiar, it has been around for a couple of years, 1982. I serve on the board and the state House Democrats appointee. Joshua Kale is the House Republicans appointee. And in the Senate, it is Senators Comita and Yaw. So each caucus gets to appoint someone to serve on PETA. PETA's job is largely to help direct energy development and energy programs in the Commonwealth, and that has meant different things at different times. There was language in the original authorizing not legislation, but in the authorizing document that referred to growing the coal industry, and that being the future of energy development in Pennsylvania. So it's like layer upon layer. It's like peeling back the onion, learning more and more about PETA. It really does show us all the places that Pennsylvania has been and all the different energy and resources that we have. The folks who are currently in charge of PETA have a 5-year plan for what they would like to do. And the legislation that I have that passed the House and that we are going to work on this summer and hopefully be able to get through the Senate in the fall would really modernize PETA. It would update some of these things that would allow the authority to be more forward-looking. Again, this is something that hasn't been updated in decades. And obviously, we know that the energy sector and energy in Pennsylvania, the sources of energy, markets for energy have all changed in the last 40 years. And so we think that it's time for sort of a tune-up on the PETA authorizing language. And one of the big pieces of the legislation that I have would allow PETA to own projects. And that's really critical when it comes to bringing back the federal money and allowing us to access pots of federal money that otherwise we would not be able to. Otherwise, we'll go to, whoever the boogeyman, West Virginia, Ohio. They'll go somewhere else because our energy authority won't have the ability to own the projects and thus to bring back that money. I think the really exciting thing about PETA is that we're actually ahead of the game in Pennsylvania. We already have an existing authority that has a pretty robust board and that has a track record of decades of action, although albeit in recent years it's been relatively inactive. It has been around, it is established, it does have people who do the work behind the scenes. In many cases, other states that are trying to access the federal money don't have that at all. They're having to build it from scratch, and obviously that takes a long time to build something, to stand it up. So we're ahead of the game, but we need to modernize our authority so we can bring back as much federal money as possible and for energy projects in the Commonwealth. And that can really mean a lot of things. That could mean any kind of energy project that you want to think about. We could potentially put it under PETA. The folks who are in charge of it currently have a 5-year plan that's really interesting that I would be glad to share if folks on this call don't have it, that really outlines a strong focus on renewable energy and making Pennsylvania a leader in the renewable energy sector. So it's definitely renewables largely that we anticipate being a large portion of PETA's work in the years to come, especially if we can get this legislation over the line in the fall in the Senate to give PETA the tools it needs to be able to pull back those federal dollars. Oh, she's here. She's behind me, Molly. There is a cat. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind staying on for a little bit to get to question and answers, I'm seeing a whole mix of questions and answers on all kinds of things. So we're gonna really quickly kind of talk about the other parts of the budget. Some of the coal and some of the Christmas presents. But I do want to take a moment to get the slides back up and introduce our team. We have been incredibly lucky, and we are grateful to have some great partnership happening between PennFuture and conservation voters. And we now have this kind of joint policy team, myself and Director of Government Affairs, Adam Nagel. We co-manage this team between organizations. And so we have Michael, Matt, Tim, and Ezra. Matt and Tim could not be with us tonight. They are missed. Same with Adam. You will be hearing from Michael and Ezra later. But I do want to say this team, kind of as I said at the top, having this extra lobby power, just 2-3 years ago, there were maybe 10 people who were really focused full time on environmental lobbying in Harrisburg. And the fossil fuel industries have about 1 lobbyist per member of the legislature. So think like over 200 people, contract lobby firms, all of that stuff. So now we can say we have a team of 6 people who can now go in and lobby on environmental issues. And we definitely saw that impact this year. And I really want to give a shout out to the entire team for some really, I'm going to say it, really badass work this year. So thank you, team. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to be the bearer of bad news at the top. So what wasn't great about this budget? We kind of wanted to keep it. There's little things here and there that are good and bad. There's always little fine lines in every budget. These are hundreds of pages of documents. But in terms of things that our 2 organizations were fighting for, one was transit funding. Transit funding, standard transit funding, technically sunset, a year and a half ago? There has been an investment of federal dollars through the Infrastructure Act at the federal level to put into transit agencies. And we know we need to invest in public transit to get cars off the road and clean our air. So we did have a transit funding shortfall. The governor made a significant, almost $300 million ask for an infusion into the state's transit agencies. Yes, I have a picture of SEPTA there. It's not just SEPTA, it's transit companies across the state. And for a while, there was almost no additional work there. Thanks to advocacy, we were able to get just over 80 million invested in transit, but it's a significant shortfall for what agencies are expecting. The other thing that was not great and absolutely took us by surprise when we were trying to figure out some things around this, more waste coal tax credits. What happens is waste coal companies, for reclamation, they get tax credits, but then this coal goes and gets burnt at facilities and then causes air pollution. We are now seeing what we believe to be I'm pretty sure it's a $55 million value tax credit for waste coal. And it's very problematic because this is used to just burn more coal. The other thing that was not great, and this is pretty sad, but you will see emails from us coming over and over again into the coming years. Whole home repairs funding, incredibly successful program, really helps build a lot of community stability. If somebody has a secure foundation and new windows and a roof that doesn't leak and insulation. And there is a huge demand. Pennsylvania has incredibly old housing stock, and the whole home repairs program not only built community stability, but also can help consumers with their electric bills. Because you've weatherized this home, you've helped the efficiency of this home by adding insulation, fixing holes in the roof, etc. And it's a very justice and equity focused program. It received an infusion of cash from the what we call the COVID dollars, ARPA, and it was not given any new funding this year. There was some funding put into an existing housing program, which is a little more geared towards new housing, which we do need in Pennsylvania. But we really need to see that whole home repairs program funded, and we're going to keep our advocacy up for that. So I am now going to turn it over to Ezra and Michael to talk about some of the other things that they were working on. So I'm going to kick it over to Michael first.
Thank you, Katie, and good evening, everyone. So the first of the good news, if next slide, please, is the Clean Streams Fund. And as the name indicates, this is an incredibly important program that helps protect the three big focuses of water pollution that we face in Pennsylvania. And those are agriculture runoff, stormwater runoff, and acid mine drainage. And the pictures on the right give you a sense of what each of those actually entails. And what the Clean Streams Fund created back in 2022 does is it took $200 million from federal money and put it into programs that deal with those three forms of pollution. So for agriculture runoff, we had the Agriculture Conservation Assistance Program. For stormwater runoff, we had the Municipal Stormwater Assistance Programs, not the most original names. And for the acid mine drainage, we had the Acid Mine Drainage Abatement and Treatment Fund. And there are many other programs as well. And these were fantastic programs, and the money has been extremely well spent. But unfortunately, due to it being federal funding, the money was going to run out by the end of 2026. So a lot of us have worked tremendously hard to get this into the budget annually to make sure that these investments are not a one-time thing, but a commitment that Pennsylvania makes generally. And in this year's budget, we achieved that with $50 million annually that we can now expect for each of these programs, and we are tremendously excited about it.
Ezra, next is you.
Hey team, good to see you again. My name is Ezra Thrush. I want to talk about just a really important program that was enacted in this year's budget just a few weeks ago. The governor put forward this agriculture innovation grant program early in his budget this year, working closely with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and a number of folks throughout the administration. And what this grant program seeks to do is to give a significant amount of money to farmers and companies to do some good work, boosting farm efficiency and competitiveness. But more specifically, what this grant program does, and actually I have the official number here, it's $10.3 million. So it's pretty big here. And what it does is it helps farmers and companies work on issues around water quality, energy efficiency, and trying to do more work around making their farms more competitive, more robust, cleaner operations at the farms themselves. As you might know, there's a significant amount of what we call on-site pollution that happens from just manure application on grounds, in particular the farming that takes place in Pennsylvania. Agriculture is a big industry in Pennsylvania. And what we were trying to get done with this grant program, and the governor and his team and the entire administration, is to see if there's a way to put some public funding behind replicating some really successful methane digesters, biodigester programs that were set up in farms across the state. In particular, there's a really successful methane digester at a farm in Juniata County the governor saw and really liked. And Representative Zimmerman and a bunch of folks in the Department of Agriculture had been lifting up a really important and really well-run methane digester also in Ephrata in Lancaster County. And so this money is going to help clean up the excess load of nutrient that comes from waste from dairy farming, and we'll take that waste and help turn it into energy. And so we're really excited about that. So Agriculture Innovation Grant Program, brand new this year. A lot of folks have been working on this, but in particular, Department of Agriculture and the State Conservation Commission, led by Doug Wolfgang at the State Conservation Commission, and of course, Air Secretary Russell Redding for the PDA. So with that, I'll kick it, I guess, back to my colleague, Michael.
Thanks, Ezra. Next slide, please. So another great thing we received in this budget is we removed a really bad loophole. So to give context, back in 2021, the General Assembly passed a sales tax exemption that was to incentivize data centers. And data centers are the things that help run video websites, social media websites, and now, crucially, artificial intelligence. They require a lot of energy, but are a big aspect of our economy. Unfortunately, though, crypto asset mining operations were not excluded in the original bill. So what that meant is that operators would go set up these data centers and use a tremendous amount of energy in exchange for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And this has been a huge issue here in Pennsylvania. We've seen a large growth of that over the past few years. And in the chat, you should look at some links that PennFuture has done on that. Thankfully, in this year's budget, we fixed this unintended loophole, so crypto mining will no longer be able to benefit from this tax credit.
And another great part of the budget we got done here is just a significant amount of money for well plugging. As you know, we have just hundreds of thousands of unplugged and uncapped orphan and abandoned wells in Pennsylvania. And these are oil and gas wells. And so back in the day, there was a significant amount of industry. Before we had something called hydraulic fracturing and fracking today, which is what leads oil and gas in Pennsylvania today. We had something called conventional, and conventional, unconventional, they're just fancy words of saying basically the pump and jack system that you see in the first picture. Pretty old school technology. Oil and gas, actually, the industry started in Pennsylvania, in the northwest part of the state. But we've had hundreds of thousands of wells, and we've had companies that have kind of gone throughout our history of the state who have just not cleaned up after themselves. And unfortunately, have gone out of business, but nobody has held them to account or have been requiring them to have bonding or to clean up their mess and to plug and cap their orphan and abandoned wells. So there's a significant challenge in doing that. We got significant funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in Pennsylvania. There's a program in particular called the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, or MERP. I'm trying to make sure I explain all my acronyms as I use them, because we can get pretty jargony in this space. But that money's come back to Pennsylvania from the federal government to invest in all of this work. Pennsylvania has been doing a pretty good job in the last year or two in increasing its plugging and capping of the orphan and abandoned oil and gas wells. But unfortunately, it needs a lot of funding to do that. And there's significant funding needed to support the program. And that includes the staff, the professional geologists, the professional engineers, the staff that are needed at all of the different regional offices, in particular, the North Central, Northeast, Northwest, and Southwest offices across Pennsylvania. PADEP's oil and gas program has a pretty significant need for staffing capacity to support the great work of permit reviewers, inspectors, program managers, and again, of course, folks who actually go out and do the work to plug and cap these orphan and abandoned wells that are significant contributors to methane pollution in Pennsylvania. And it's a really big, bad greenhouse gas in Pennsylvania. So there was a big challenge. There was a big problem at hand here. At the risk of not having sustainable funding for many, many years in Pennsylvania for oil and gas program in Pennsylvania, we got to a point in which the Commonwealth was about to run out of money for the oil and gas program, and something had to be changed rapidly, really quickly to fix this issue. I know the Commonwealth and the governor's budget office were looking at this program actually going in the red sometime later this summer if there wasn't a fix. We still don't have a sustainable funding mechanism attached to this yet for the Commonwealth, unfortunately, but the General Assembly agreed with the governor that they were going to enact $11 million to keep the program afloat and to keep pushing out the money to cap and plug our orphan and abandoned oil and gas wells so that they can keep the program moving forward and really take the investment and the momentum from the federal government to keep doing this good work. And so the oil and gas program can continue to do its work, and we're excited to see that it didn't go in the red. Thankfully, PADP didn't have to lay off any employees, and the work can continue. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it back to Katie.
Yeah. Thank you, Ezra. Appreciate that. Ezra, Michael, thank you again. Shout out to the entire team for a lot of hard work to get some of this good stuff in the budget. With the budget, we're going to go to Q&A. We have had a ton of questions flow in, and I know we only have, we don't have Representative Fiedler's entire night. So I do want to start. We don't need to be sharing the slides. I'd love to pull up the team here for some questions, and bring everybody on. And we're going to kick this off with things about solar for schools. I will preface this. We are going to ask these questions. You might get an answer of it's being figured out, because we have not, like, DCED has not fully implemented this program and it just got passed. So we're going to start with a question here. Are there any geographic distribution of funds requirements in solar for schools?
That was a great question. Thank you. To the person who wrote that. I can't go in the chat to see your name, but it is a good question, and I thank you. So there are different weights and preferences in the legislation to give some light guidance to DCD about where to appropriate, about where to send the, we're excited about the $25 million. Absolutely. We also know that it is not enough to help as many school districts as would like to have financial assistance to do these projects. So it is a exciting but limited pot of money. And we put in, there are some light guidance in the legislation to recommend to DCED, and that is who ultimately will make the recommendations about who gets the grant dollars, recommendations that these dollars be distributed across the Commonwealth. So not all just put in one specific place, but distributed. And also, for example, my colleague, Jim Struzzi, who is from Indiana County, so the other side of the state, we had the chance to go out and visit him, and in his district is a coal-fired power plant that, regardless of how you feel about coal-fired power plants in that area, no doubt was integral to their economy and the job market and the way of life for a lot of people who were there. That has closed. And so people there are facing tremendous challenges, as we know, happening across the Commonwealth when we switch from one sort of energy to another. And so Rep. Struzzi had the good idea to, thank you for sharing the information, Jess. I wasn't sure how to share it to everybody. I shared it to the host, so I appreciate that. Rep. Struzzi had the good idea to include language in the legislation successfully that would encourage DCED to look at projects that are in traditional fossil fuel extraction areas in the Commonwealth, to make that one of the factors that they consider when deciding where to put a Solar for Schools project, and one of the factors when they're looking at how to divide up the money. So other than that, we largely left it up to DCED's discretion. There is no specific cap. It is up to DCED to make a set of recommendations about where they would like these to be, and then that would go to CFA to be approved or not approved. But it is very much within DCED's hands. And as Katie prefaced, it's all still being figured out. I have a meeting with them in a couple of days to start talking about it. So as anyone on this call who has worked in government or has ever interacted with government, these things will definitely take a little time. And I'm glad to come back on in a couple of months when there's a real application and set of guidelines and things like that. And we can, talk about it and find ways for school districts across the Commonwealth to become aware of it. But much of it really is still being figured out. That said, there's no limit or specific area where something has to happen or cannot happen.
Yeah. Another question here. We have someone in Haverford Township, and it looks like that school district may have turned down solar for one of their schools. How do you think this could help people maybe convince their local school districts to take a closer look at this?
Yes, I would be glad to speak with the person from Haverford. And I put contact information in the chat. Please reach out to Steve in my office. He's been there since day one and knows the Solar for Schools legislation very, very closely. Our hope is that the Solar for Schools, the creation of the program within DCED with the guidance of DEP, just like all of the people power, the brain trust that will be there within our government helping school districts figure out how to do this will be helpful. And also that the money will additionally be helpful in convincing some school districts. I don't know the specific Haverford example, but I do know there's quite a few school districts. There's one in Moon in Rep. Gatos's district that we visited that about a decade ago considered doing solar. They would have, I forget exactly what the claim was. I think it's that they would have had the largest solar array on the western part of the state. I mean, they really had like huge ambitions. They were a bit ahead of the curve. They were really excited. They had all these ideas, and then it didn't happen. So there are quite a few school districts across the Commonwealth that have thought about this and considered it, and that missing piece just wasn't there to get over the finish line. We're hoping that big brain trust of Solar for Schools that we are creating within DCD with the help of DEP will assist a lot of school districts in being able to make it a reality. And certainly that that apparatus will help school districts become aware of and apply for, if they choose to, the federal money, which, as I said, will cover 30 to 50% of every project. And I imagine that could be a huge motivator for a lot of school districts that are interested, but just not quite there.
Oh. And thank you, Pam. You dropped that in there, and we'll make sure that all your team catches that email to make sure we get it to Steve in Representative Fiedler's office. Last question on Solar for Schools before we do a little PETA and then broader budget questions. Lots of questions coming in tonight. I do want to just ask, you said 30 to 50%. What about some of those more disadvantaged schools? How much do we think percentage-wise they might be able to get covered because of federal investments?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I say 30 to 50% because we are confident that every Solar for Schools project, based on the federal guidance, based on conversations with the offices of the senators and the Congress people who know, of course, the IRA language better than anyone. We're confident that every Solar for Schools project would be covered 30%. And also there are 10% credits that you can stack on top of that 30%. So for example, school districts that had high poverty and a region of high poverty had the ability to get an additional 10%. School districts, if you use American-made materials, you could get an additional credit. So there are all sorts of tens that you could stack on top of it, depending on certainly sourcing for the materials is a big question, whether you can get 10% added for sourcing American-made materials. But there are other factors, including the traditional fossil fuel extraction language. So there is absolutely preference in the federal guidelines for high poverty areas and also for areas that have traditionally relied on a different source of energy to assist them in making this shift. You're muted, Katie.
We're getting, is there any requirement for Solar for Schools legislation about using the data to improve STEM education?
There's no requirement for using the data to improve STEM education, but we have worked very closely with the Philadelphia Energy Authority on the eastern side of the state, and also the PA Solar Center, which covers more the western half of the state, PEA in Philadelphia has done a lot of curriculum development and working with schools here in Philadelphia to incorporate STEM, also to work on CTE and training programs. And they have some of that they're going to be rolling out pretty soon, assuming all goes well. That's absolutely a piece of the pie. And I know that PA Solar Center is committed to making that happen as well. There's nothing specific that's required in the legislation, but we do know that there's great interest in it. We know that the field is growing, especially the solar field is growing very, very quickly. We have worked with our labor partners since the beginning, and I know that they are interested as well in finding more ways to make clear to young people, and by young people I mean high school students, but I also mean middle school students, that this is a career that they could absolutely have. We're hoping, one thing I'm super excited for is getting to go out and watch the students at one of these schools watch the workers installing the solar panels. I feel like that will be a really cool, like, full circle moment in which we not just succeeded with the legislation, helped a school be able to get to that point of being part of the renewable energy sector, but also hopefully passed on that knowledge and excitement about it to the next generation. And I think that will be a really, just a really cool moment. And we've seen school districts that we visited have partnered with their FFA program, their Future Farmers of America, so that animals can graze under it. I mean, there's just all sorts of cool partnerships. One of the schools we visited had the students learned about physics and thermodynamics by studying the solar panels. And there I'm starting to get like it out of my depth, so I'm not going to go too far. But it was really cool. And we got to hear the students give a presentation about all the things that they had learned based on these solar panels that were on the roof of their building. So I think there's no mandate there per se, but there is definitely a hope and really an expectation that some of these organizations and absolutely the labor unions will continue to get more involved and to make this a reality for the next generation of Pennsylvanians.
Thank you. In the interest of time, and I really want to thank all of our background team for keeping on top of all of the questions you guys are submitting all over the place. Thank you. We will do our best to follow up as we can if we do not get to your question tonight. I'm actually Representative Fiedler. I want to give you a break. We do not have too much more time to answer some of the more general budget questions, or I want to make sure we have that time. And I'm actually going to kind of kick this over to my team. There have been some questions. The New York and others are starting to distribute a lot of funds already that has come through the IRA funding, the Inflation Reduction Act. But Pennsylvania keeps running into trouble, rolling out the date, etc. How can we advocate to get this going sooner? There are people who would like to be able to convert to heat pumps and things like that. What can we do to stay abreast of things? One thing I'm going to highlight is a wonderful website that can be dropped in the chat, Clean Energy Funding. But Michael or Ezra, would either of you, one of you, like to talk a little bit about the rollout? Ezra. Oh, there you are.
I only have, I mean, I can speak to heat pumps in particular. I don't, Michael, if you have any other thoughts on that first. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take a stab at it here. There is significant federal funding that's come to Pennsylvania already and is going to continue coming to Pennsylvania through at least fiscal year 26, probably further. As you know, the most significant packages working on climate and clean energy and environmental work have been passed during the Biden-Harris administration. That's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. All this money has taken some time. That passed in 2021. That's taken some time to get through the process and come to Pennsylvania. And then the state agencies, a part of the executive branch, have needed to set up programs to get that money in and set up and start putting it, pushing it out the doors getting money in projects in the ground as you were. So we do have a big focus on clean energy, renewable energy. There's something at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection called the Energy Programs Office. And the Energy Programs Office has been growing leaps and bounds in the last couple of years since this money has been coming to Pennsylvania. We also have a brand new program that's an office of the governor's budget called the Office of Critical Investments. That's run by Executive Director Brian Regley, who works for the governor. But all they do, and they have legions of staff under this office, that all they do is seek out opportunities of federal funding to bring back to Pennsylvania and make sure that Pennsylvania is leading the charge on air emissions, on carbon dioxide emissions reduction, on working climate issues. There are 3 staffers now for the Commonwealth on these issues that are just working to bring federal dollars back home to do work on these issues. In particular, I mentioned MERP earlier, and I saw that there was a comment about MERP. Again, the Methane Emissions Reduction Program. Need to do that every time I use an acronym. And we got, I believe it was $135 million last time I looked at that program when I was working for the admin. But that's the significant funding that goes that Senator Casey advocated for in federal government, and a bunch of folks from Pennsylvania delegation, both parties advocated to come to Pennsylvania to use that money to spend for in particular plugging and capping orphan and abandoned wells. There's also significant funding that's available for installing heat pumps across Pennsylvania. As you know, we have a history of using coal, oil, and gas predominantly for a lot of our energy sources and home heating. There is a move to take out some of these old processes and to put in new heat pump technology. Pennsylvania is a part of something called the U.S. Climate Alliance. And along with the U.S. Climate Alliance and working with the White House, Pennsylvania has signed on to a pledge to meet 30,000 heat pumps between now and 2030, which is pretty big, pretty significant. So I know that Pennsylvania DEP and the Office of Energy Programs at the DEP are working on heat pumps in particular. So there's a lot of significant funding available from the federal government. We still haven't received all of our funding from the federal government. There's more to come, and that's something I think when this legislation was passed in DC, and when we start to pass enabling legislation in Harrisburg to move this money into to utilize and unleash this money, it takes some time for folks to see the real tangible benefits and impacts of this money out on the ground. But we're just starting to see it, and I just want to let folks know that we're not done yet. We're going to start seeing more of that coming soon. So keep your eyes peeled and keep looking out for the monies that are going to be spent for climate and clean energy in Pennsylvania.
And I'll be just real quick. There's things that are done on a statewide level, and that's what the PETA that was talked about earlier is a huge part of. But there's also things we can do as individuals. So I definitely encourage you all to check out that clean energy funding website and fill out the forms. You can see how you can save money on things like heat pumps, etc. And also, I'm going to post in the chat a recent webinar that we held on Inflation Reduction Act programs that walk through all the different ways individuals can save money, because it's going to take actions from individual, state, federal in order for us to fight climate change. And this is a great way to see your how you can get involved with that.
Thank you, guys. And I do want to highlight, there was just a quick one right here in the chat. When is the program going to be up and running? I can tell you that we are making sure that that clean energy website is updated as quickly as possible. And I do believe sometime this winter for that rebate program. Another interesting question that came in, I think we have time for maybe 2 more. So many questions. Another very interesting one is regarding waste coal. We have to do something with all of the waste coal mounds, especially in the anthracite region. We got to do something with it. So why is this huge tax credit not great? I'm going to put it in the simplest terms because it can get a little confusing when we're talking about tax credits and the Department of Revenue and business taxes, etc. But basically, these waste coal companies they're broad companies. They have different arms. And so they're going to dip into all kinds of reclamation tax credits. And then they're going to dip over here into these tax credits, et cetera, so that basically it costs them nothing to burn coal. That is the problem with these waste coal tax credits. They are getting a lot of, frankly, free waste coal. They are making money not only on energy generation, on reclamation. You throw this in and it's kind of a giveaway. And it's not kind of a giveaway, it is a giveaway, and it's a significant giveaway to fossil fuel related companies that already have some pretty sick profits. So that's one of the reasons that we're not big fans of these tax credits, is because the double and sometimes triple dipping here. Yes, things do need to be cleaned up. And there's some really good stuff happening out there, and some other stuff being researched about other ways to clean up that waste coal as well. I think I have one more minute. Oh my goodness, I'm just kind of randomly scrolling and picking now, and I'm looking at the time. And let's see. All right, it is the time. I'm gonna have to do the last question, which is a great question and a wonderful pivot. How do we get more engaged in next year's budget process? The first thing I'm going to do before, Tinku, I'm sorry it wasn't further in depth, but I'm trying to save some time. I'm going to turn it back over to Jess for some things here momentarily. But one of the things you can do from the joint policy team's perspective is when you get one of those emails from us and say, tell your elected official to vote, or tell your elected official you don't like this, that's one good thing you can do to help this policy team, because our elected officials do see those and their offices do keep track of constituent communications. So Jess, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Katie. And thanks to everyone for being here tonight. We really appreciate your interest in these important aspects of our government. Like Katie said, I'm Jess Catterett. I'm our Director of Civic Engagement at PennFuture and CVPA. And while you're here, we've got a couple quick ways for you to take action before we close out for the night. So I'm sure everyone has been thinking about our democracy lately. I know I have. And especially as we honor the 4th anniversary of the passing of the late, great Congressman John Lewis, we're working on building support for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Unfortunately, many voting protections have been stripped from the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And passing this bill would help to restore and protect the voting rights that we need in order to make sure everyone's voices are heard. So tap the link in the chat to tell your representatives to support this act, because we know we need a strong working democracy to pass good environmental protections. Secondly, we've heard a lot about clean energy tonight, and thankfully we've had these several great wins in the budget, but we know we need to do more. So we're also dropping a link in the chat to an action alert in support of clean energy for climate action across the board. This is helping to build the people power of thousands of folks across PA that support cleaner, renewable energy resources. And the fun of this is that you don't only get to add your name. There's an opportunity once you click through to share your story or a photo of yourself so that we can add the faces to the names of people that support clean energy across the state. So be sure to click that link. A quick reminder while we're talking about clean energy to make sure to check out cleanenergyfunding.org so that you can see which tax credits and benefits you qualify for. And last but certainly not least, PennFuture is embarking on projects that connect economic development and environmental issues in order to promote a healthy economy, healthy communities, and a healthy environment. We recently released a report to this end, and we're hosting another virtual opportunity to learn more coming up on Wednesday, August 14th at 6 p.m. So we'll drop the link in the chat for that as well, so you can sign up to join us and learn more. And don't worry, all of these links also will be in your email. And with that, I will pass it off to the Executive Director of Conservation Voters of PA and Vice President of Civic Engagement for PennFuture, Molly Parson, to take us home.
Thank you so much, Jess. And thank you so much to everyone for attending. My cat wants to say hi and thank you as well, clearly. I wanted to thank Representative Elizabeth Fiedler for her tireless advocacy on behalf of Solar for Schools and the PETA legislation, as well as just in general for being a tremendous environmental champion representing Philadelphia and Harrisburg. I want to thank our entire staff and all of our speakers, particularly the policy and lobbying team. I cannot tell you how many hours they put in treading the halls of Harrisburg, making sure that our members' voices were heard throughout this budget process. It is truly an effort that they put in every year to make sure that we're approving a budget that takes our needs, our community's needs on the environment, climate change, democracy, conservation into account. They were incredibly successful this year, and we're so proud of them. And then I want to thank each of you for joining. This work does not happen without you. There were so many people on this call today, and you are, I often say that we are a people-powered organization, and that is so true. This work does not happen without each and every one of your engagement, your knowledge, and the passion that you bring to our work. Our policy and lobbying team cannot go into that building in Harrisburg and talk to those legislators without having your backing and knowing that they carry the power and the community that we have together with them. So by showing up at this webinar, by contributing, by taking action, by doing all the things that you do every day in your communities, we are more powerful and more effective for it. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a fantastic evening.